Where next for space games? Well, it's a genre that has been in flux for years at this point, sometimes for the better and often for the worse. Yes, it's definitely a niche gaming, but it's one that a lot of us have grown to love. A question that quite often plays on my mind then: where is this genre heading? Now, I've touched on this a bit in a few previous videos, but really I wanted to talk about this a little bit more. It means it's going to be another of my rambling videos, but hopefully that's all cool. Also, this video is sponsored by Star Trek Fleet Command, more on that in just a moment. This year then marked 10 years since Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen made their appearance on Kickstarter. Hard to believe, isn't it? An entire decade since the space game genre returned. As we move into 2023 and the 11th year, it seems the genre has fundamentally shifted, changed in a way that 10 years ago I wouldn't have expected. I previously mentioned two different sides to this. Firstly, many of the space games are focusing on single player. Check the previous video for a list on that. Secondly, it feels as though the genre is trending away from the themes that, in the past, were hallmarks of the space sim genre. One example, focusing more on first-person combat and less on spaceship activity. Sometimes it feels like moving away from a vast galaxy expanding focus and turning towards being laser-focused instead. And talking of galaxy expanding, this video is sponsored by Star Trek Fleet Command. Do you ever find yourself stuck without a PC or console, but still desperate to play a game? Well, Star Trek Fleet Command might be a good option for you. The latest update brings the much-loved crew of Deep Space Nine into the game world. Take on the likes of Sisko, Kira and Miles O'Brien into your crew and make use of their capabilities of ship survivability. The new update introduces a new arc that will offer something for everyone, including new missions that follow the Deep Space Nine narrative. And then there's the new Alliance starbases. These massive bases can be cooperatively built by alliances and clearly represent an alliance's strength. Each player within an alliance can contribute towards these towering achievements by bringing new progression, buffs and mutual benefits. Join the rich and vibrant galaxy of Star Trek Fleet Command by checking out the link in the video description. Available on iOS, Android and Windows. For me then, 2021 was where I feel things within the genre really started to change. Obviously, Odyssey, the expansion for Elite Dangerous, was a huge step towards that. But it wasn't really the only change, more like a step along a trending path. Star Citizen continued and continues to develop, and naturally a big part of that game is indeed, definitely, most certainly, first person. No Man's Sky is really more first person than it is space, and naturally a big part of 2023 for the genre will be Starfield, a single player game with a huge focus on first person in addition to the ships. Overall then, it feels as though the genre has never been in a better place, yet at the same time it feels very different to how I expected it to play out. In the past years, the focus for a space game tended to be a lot more on space sims, the traditional fly a ship in space and then trade, explore, mine and fight. It's really the true foundations of the genre. It started with Elite in 1984 and in the later decades carried into the likes of the X franchise and arguably even into EVE Online 2. Interspersed between this was the Wing Commander franchise and Freelancer. What we saw there then was two different approaches. One, the open world sandbox, the other, a cinematic adventure. The past couple of years feel as though the genre is shifting towards a blend of these two approaches. Elite took some steps towards it with Odyssey and solidified it more with the recent changes in their approach to narrative. The Azimuth Saga and Update 14 certainly feel that Frontier want the game to be at least a little more of an adventure game than it previously was. And this entire cinematic sandbox hybrid seems to be the real focus of Star Citizen. I'd argue that Starfield will likely be very much more of the same, but in single player form. No Man's Sky meanwhile remains its own and somewhat unique thing. But as it stands today, the more traditional space sim focused games seem to be found away from the big names. X4 Foundations and Evochron both are excellent examples of titles dedicated to the traditional space sim themes. Again, that's the themes of dedicated exploration, trading, mining, combat, and all the rest of that great stuff. Now, don't get me wrong here, all of this is certainly possible in Elite and Star Citizen, but it also feels those aspects are not those titles' primary focus. After all, when was the last time that Frontier developed upon and improved trading, for example, in Elite? Elite definitely started out as the traditional space sim, but Frontier have shown unwillingness to further develop those themes and instead are now focusing on other avenues. So that really brings me back to the question I opened with. Where is the genre heading? Well, this is extremely hard to predict, but I see two trends happening. Firstly, games currently in development appear to be having a laser focus. Everspace 2, for example, is very heavily focused on combat. Meanwhile, Flight of Nova is, well, more about flight. The existing big titles seem to be moving towards that cinematic narrative sandbox hybrid meanwhile. So really, as far as I see it, the bottom line is that here, at the end of 2022, it feels as though the future will hold far less traditional focused space sims. It means there's probably a lot of room here for anyone that wants to pick up that slack. Egosoft, for example, are very well positioned to try and do that with the X series. Meanwhile, I feel that the space game genre as a whole is moving in a bold direction, and in 2023 it's very likely going to pick up a much broader audience. We'll have to see how that goes. Do let me know in the comments section below, what do you feel will be the future of the space game genre? Where do you feel it's heading next? Is it going to be, well, is it changing? Am I just imagining it all for starters? Is it just the same as it's always been? Or are things changing indeed? Do let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys and girls next time.